The town was small, dusty, and quiet for most of the day, except for the occasional clatter of horse hooves on the wooden streets and the soft creak of wind through the old buildings. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where news traveled faster than the wind, and where life moved slowly, as if time itself had chosen to take a nap. But even in such a peaceful place, mischief could find its way into the hearts of those who were restless, bored, or simply looking for amusement. Among the residents, there were a group of young men who often gathered at the saloon. They were known for their laughter, their playful tricks, and sometimes their careless pranks. They were not mean-spirited by nature, but they enjoyed testing limits and seeing reactions. On this particular evening, the air was warm, tinged with the smell of dust and horse leather, and the sun was just beginning to sink behind the hills, casting long shadows across the town's wooden buildings. The saloon doors creaked open and closed as the men entered, their boots leaving dusty prints on the floor. They exchanged jokes, stories, and tall tales of adventures, real or imagined, their voices echoing off the walls. As the evening wore on, their conversation drifted towards someone who had recently captured their attention. A young Apache girl who lived on the outskirts of town. She was not like the other townspeople. She was fearless, independent, and intelligent, with a spirit that seemed to belong to the wind and the open lands, rather than the narrow streets of the town. The men had seen her more than once, roaming freely near the forest, hunting small animals with ease, or helping her family with tasks that required both skill and strength. They noticed her confidence, the way she carried herself with dignity, and even her sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The young men, however, saw her in a different light. To them, she was daring, untamed, and amusing, almost like a character from one of the exaggerated stories they loved to tell. They laughed among themselves, imagining what it would be like to play a trick on her. It started as a simple joke in their minds, a harmless prank that they were sure would make her surprised and perhaps even embarrassed. None of them thought of the consequences or the strength of character she might possess. The idea began to take shape more clearly as one of the men, leaning back in his chair and taking a sip of warm, bitter coffee, spoke up. "What if we locked her in the sheriff's cell for the night?" he said, half joking, half serious. The others froze for a moment, the words hanging in the air. Then laughter erupted, loud and careless, bouncing off the walls of the saloon. The thought seemed brilliant to them. She would be surprised, perhaps a little frightened, and it would be the perfect story to retell. "Huh! Can you imagine her face?" another said, slapping the table. "She won't know what hit her." They all laughed harder, their minds already picturing the moment of triumph. In their excitement, they did not notice the subtle hesitation of one among them, a quieter man who had always respected the girl and her family. But the excitement was contagious, and soon, even he found himself nodding, caught up in the energy of the group. The plan seemed simple. They would wait until she wandered near the town, then quietly lead her to the sheriff's office. The sheriff was known to be kind, though sometimes a little naive, and they believed he would see the humor in their idea. When the plan was mentioned to him later, he hesitated. "Are you sure this is wise?" he asked, adjusting his hat nervously. "I don't want anyone hurt." But the men reassured him, laughing and insisting it was only a joke. Harmless fun. The sheriff finally agreed, trusting that it would be just as they promised. That night, as the town grew quiet, the Apache girl was unaware of the scheme unfolding. She had spent the day helping her family, gathering herbs, and learning skills that had been passed down for generations. She was used to moving through the world with caution and intelligence, but the trust she had in her own abilities and knowledge made her underestimate the intentions of these young men. Her mind was occupied with other thoughts, her family, her duties, and the coming days of work in the fields. She did not suspect that she would become the center of a joke that could test her courage and ingenuity. As darkness fell, the men set their plan into motion. They moved quietly, laughing softly as they waited for the right moment. When the girl appeared, walking along the edge of town, they quickly surrounded her, making sure she could not escape. She was startled at first, her eyes wide and alert, but she quickly realized what was happening. Her first instinct was anger. How dare they think she could be trapped so easily? Her heart raced. But she did not panic. Instead, she assessed the situation calmly, observing the men's positions, their movements, and the small details of the street around them. Despite her fear, she tried to reason with them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. But the men only laughed, trying to reassure her that it was all in good fun. They opened the door to the sheriff's office and led her inside, careful not to let her slip away. She looked around the small, dimly lit room, noting the sturdy wooden bars of the cell and the cold metal lock. She understood immediately that it would not be impossible to escape, but it would require patience and clever thinking. Once she was inside, the men slammed the door shut, laughing at what they thought was a perfect prank. They left, their voices fading into the night, confident that she would spend a restless and frightened night behind the bars. The sheriff, watching from a distance, shook his head but said nothing, trusting that the girl's intelligence would see her through. Inside the cell, the Apache girl took a deep breath. The initial shock and anger had passed, replaced by a quiet determination. She examined every corner of the cell, every crack in the wood, every hinge and lock. Her mind worked quickly, recalling lessons from her family about staying alert, thinking ahead, and using one's surroundings to advantage. She understood that fear could be an enemy, but calm and patience could be a powerful ally. Hours passed. The night was cold and still, the only sounds the distant calls of owls and the soft rustle of the wind through the streets. The girl remained alert, moving carefully, testing small weaknesses in the cell. She thought about her family, about the lands she protected, and about the pride that came with being courageous and clever. She was not a girl to be underestimated, and she knew it. Meanwhile, the men returned to the saloon, bragging about their prank, sharing laughter and stories of how surprised she would be. None of them imagined the lesson they were about to learn, that courage, intelligence, and spirit are not to be toyed with, and that one should never underestimate someone because they are different from themselves. As the night grew deeper, the Apache girl prepared for the morning. She was patient, she was clever, and she was ready to prove, without a word, that a joke could quickly become a lesson. By the time the first hints of dawn began to touch the sky, she had already planned her next steps carefully, knowing that her escape would not only restore her freedom, but also teach those who had underestimated her the value of respect. Though it began as a moment of mischief, the night had transformed into a test of courage, patience, and cleverness. The Apache girl was calm, composed, and determined, ready to face whatever challenges awaited her in the morning. She had already turned the situation into an opportunity to demonstrate strength and intelligence, quietly preparing to change the minds of everyone who thought they could play a harmless joke on her. The town slept unaware, the men smug and overconfident, and the sheriff oblivious to what was about to unfold. The young Apache girl, locked behind cold iron bars, was not frightened. She was thinking, planning, and preparing, embodying a spirit that could not be caged. That night, she became more than just a girl in a cell. She became a force of cleverness, patience, and quiet courage that would be remembered long after the sun rose. And so, the stage was set for a morning that no one in the town would forget. The prank they thought would be amusing was about to become a story of respect, humility, and the surprising power of a young girl who refused to be underestimated. The night in the sheriff's cell was quiet, but it was far from empty. For the Apache girl, the silence was a challenge, not a comfort. She had faced difficult situations before, but this one was different. She was trapped behind cold, iron bars, in a place full of strangers' ideas, a place meant to restrain and control. Yet, she was not afraid. She was calm, and her mind was alert. Every sound, every shadow, every small creak in the floor or rattle of the bars became important. She listened carefully, her sharp ears catching the faintest hint of movement outside her cell. At first, she could feel the anger bubbling inside her. She had been tricked, made to look foolish by people who thought she was naive. But the anger faded quickly. She realized that panic or rage would not help her. Instead, she focused on observation. Her eyes roamed every inch of the cell. The walls were rough and wooden, the floor slightly uneven, and the ceiling low enough that she could almost reach it if she stood on a table. but no tables were inside. The iron bars of the cell were strong. But she noted the way the lock clicked into place, the hinges that held the door, and the small spaces where a careful hand might manipulate them. Her thoughts were methodical. She remembered lessons from her family about staying calm in danger, about patience and planning. Her grandmother had once told her, "Courage is not just about strength. It is about patience, thinking, and waiting for the right moment." She repeated those words silently to herself, letting them steady her mind. The prank that the men thought was clever had actually given her a chance to show her intelligence, her cleverness, and her patience. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The wind outside whispered against the walls, carrying distant sounds of animals moving in the dark. Occasionally, she could hear the faint laughter of the young men, far enough away to be careless, as they told the story of the prank to anyone who would listen. They had no idea that the girl they tried to trap was not panicking or struggling, but planning, observing, and quietly preparing to turn the tables. She tried the door carefully first. The lock was solid, and the bars were strong. She realized that a direct escape would be impossible. She could not force the door open with her strength alone, and any rash attempt might alert someone passing by. She stepped back, taking a deep breath, and considered her surroundings. There were small cracks in the wood of the cell, slight weaknesses in the frame, and even the hinges, though strong, had small gaps that could be tested. Her mind mapped every detail, every angle, every potential way out. She also reflected on her own spirit. Being locked in a cell might have scared someone else, but she had never been afraid of challenges. Fear was not her guide. Observation and thinking were. She began to plan her actions step by step. If she waited for the right moment, no one would even realize she had escaped until she chose to reveal herself. The men who thought they were clever would learn a lesson about underestimating her strength and intelligence. Time passed slowly. Midnight came and went, the stars outside bright against the black sky. She could hear the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves as the wind moved through the trees. Each sound reminded her of the outside world, free and wide, where she belonged. She touched the bars, feeling their coldness, and tested the lock with her fingers. She could not pick it, but she noticed that the wood surrounding it was slightly worn, likely from years of use. That gave her an idea. A careful movement at the right moment could loosen the lock enough for her to slip out. Hunger and cold began to creep in, but she ignored them. Survival was about patience and cleverness, not rush. She shifted her weight, stretched quietly, and ensured she remained alert. She noticed the tiny shadow in one corner where the light of the moon through the window barely reached. She crouched there, using the shadows to hide her movements, and waited. Waiting became her strength, not her weakness. She remembered how her father had once said, "Sometimes the quietest moment is the strongest one." That night, she understood exactly what he meant. Hours blended into one another, the night stretching endlessly, but she never grew restless. She practiced small movements, testing the strength of the bars, the noise her actions might create, and the patience required to act at the perfect time. She even whispered to herself softly, imagining she was speaking to the wind, telling it her plan. "I will leave when they least expect it. I will teach them to respect me." The wind seemed to answer with a soft rustle, encouraging her determination. Meanwhile, in the town, the young men believed the joke was going perfectly. They had returned to the saloon, boasting and laughing at the trapped girl. None of them suspected that she was not struggling helplessly but quietly observing and preparing. Their overconfidence was their weakness. They assumed that her fear would be enough to keep her in the cell all night, but they had failed to understand her courage and intelligence. The Apache girl also thought about her family. She knew that they would be worried if they knew what had happened. But she did not panic. She had survived far more dangerous situations than a single locked cell. She thought about the lands she roamed, the skills she had learned, and the lessons passed down through generations. All of these gave her confidence. She was not just a girl trapped in a room. She was a clever and resourceful person with the ability to turn danger into opportunity. As the first hints of dawn approached, the girl made her move. She had spent hours quietly testing the structure of the cell and calculating the best way to leave without attracting attention. The lock, which had seemed solid, now had a small weakness she could exploit. With careful hands and gentle pressure, she worked on it, making sure not to make a sound. Each movement was deliberate and precise. Every creak of the floor or shift of the bars was carefully controlled. Finally, after what seemed like endless effort, she felt a small shift in the lock. It was not fully open yet, but it was enough to allow her the chance she needed. She waited, listening carefully to the town, making sure no one was nearby. The night had taught her patience, and now, the early morning taught her timing. She was ready. Step by step, she moved, using the small gaps and weaknesses she had found. Her body was light, her movements silent, and her mind focused entirely on the task. Every action was calculated, every step measured, and then, just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she slipped through the gap, her body moving with the grace and skill of someone who had learned to survive in both wilderness and human-made obstacles. The Apache girl was free, but she was not done. She knew the men who had trapped her would soon discover the empty cell and be shocked. She left no trace behind except for the faintest hints of movement, subtle enough that only a clever observer might notice. Her escape was not just about physical freedom. It was about proving that intelligence, patience, and courage could overcome thoughtlessness and arrogance. As the sun rose, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange, she returned to the lands of her family, her heart calm and her spirit proud. The night had been a test, and she had passed with intelligence and courage. The townspeople, the young men, and even the sheriff would soon learn the lesson she silently carried. Respect, patience, and cleverness are not to be underestimated. By the time the town began to stir with the noise of daily life, the Apache girl was already far away, safe and unobserved. The prank had failed, not because of strength or luck, but because it had underestimated her mind and spirit. Her quiet victory would soon become a story that no one in the town could forget. A lesson that would travel faster than their careless laughter, teaching humility and respect without a single word spoken. That night, and the morning that followed, showed the power of patience, courage, and intelligence. The Apache girl had turned a situation meant to humiliate her into a demonstration of her strength, showing that cleverness and calm thinking were as powerful as any weapon. The men who had planned the prank would soon understand that true bravery is quiet, observant, and unexpected, and that those who underestimate others often learn their most important lessons in the most surprising ways. The morning sun rose slowly over the small, dusty town, casting long, golden shadows along the wooden streets. Birds chirped in the distance, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee began to drift from the small bakery at the corner. Life in the town seemed to carry on as usual, quiet and unhurried, but an unexpected event was about to shake the calmness that everyone took for granted. Inside the sheriff's office, the young men who had locked the Apache girl in the cell the previous night were rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Their laughter from the night before had faded into a sense of nervous anticipation. They had been so sure that their prank would be harmless, that the girl would spend the night frightened and confused, and that they would have the perfect story to tell at the saloon. But now, in the bright light of morning, doubt crept in. Had she really been able to endure the night quietly? Had their joke gone too far? The sheriff himself arrived at the office, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the sun. He had spent the early hours of the morning thinking about the plan he had reluctantly agreed to. Though he trusted the young men to keep things safe, he had a nagging feeling in his chest that something might have gone wrong. When he approached the cell, he noticed immediately that the door was slightly ajar. His heart skipped a beat. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" There was no answer. His brow furrowed, and he quickly pushed the door open. The cell was empty. No sign of struggle, no footprints except those of the previous night. No evidence that anyone had been locked inside. For a moment, the sheriff was confused. How could this be? Had the girl somehow vanished into thin air? Word spread quickly through the town. First came the whispers, "She's gone." Then the loud conversations. "Who? The Apache girl?" People gathered near the sheriff's office, their curiosity growing with every passing minute. The young men who had played the prank tried to explain themselves, but their voices were shaky. We thought it was just a joke," one of them stammered. "She was locked up all night. She couldn't have left." But the signs told a different story. There were small scratches near the lock, faint marks along the edge of the doorframe, and subtle disturbances in the dust on the floor that suggested someone had carefully made their escape. The townspeople examined everything, their eyes widening in disbelief. None of them had seen the girl leave, yet she was gone. The reality began to sink in. She had not only escaped, but had done so with skill and intelligence that no one had anticipated. The young men who had carried out the prank were filled with panic and shame. Their laughter and boasting from the previous night now seemed foolish and reckless. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that their actions had underestimated the courage and cleverness of the Apache girl. Their confidence had been their weakness, and the result was a lesson they would never forget. Meanwhile, the Apache girl had quietly returned to her family's land outside the town. She moved with care, ensuring that no one followed her and that no tracks gave away her path. Her mind was calm, but proud. The night in the cell had been a test, and she had passed it. She had demonstrated that fear could be controlled, that patience and careful planning could overcome even the most unexpected situations. The prank, intended to humiliate her, had become an opportunity to prove her strength and intelligence. Back in the town, people began to realize that this event was more than just a simple prank gone wrong. The sheriff called a meeting, summoning the young men and some of the townspeople to discuss what had happened. He spoke firmly but without anger, emphasizing the importance of respect and caution. "We cannot treat anyone carelessly," he said. "What was meant to be a joke has shown us that bravery and intelligence are not to be underestimated." The young men stood quietly, ashamed and humbled. They had expected laughter and surprise, but what they faced instead was awe and respect for the girl they had tried to trap. They began to understand the lesson they had learned too late, that people who act with courage and intelligence cannot be judged or controlled by others, and that thoughtless actions can lead to unexpected consequences. In the days that followed, the Apache girl became something of a legend in the town. People spoke quietly about how she had escaped the cell, describing her as clever, brave, and unyielding. Children listened with wide eyes as older townspeople recounted the story, and even the young men who had played the prank felt a mixture of shame and admiration. Her silence and composure in the face of danger had made a stronger impression than any words could. The girl herself said nothing about the events to anyone in the town. She had no need to boast or seek revenge. Her strength lay in her actions, in the way she had calmly turned a situation meant to humiliate her into an opportunity to demonstrate her courage and intelligence. She returned to her daily life, helping her family, tending to the land, and moving with the same independence and confidence as before. Yet now, the people of the town looked at her differently. They saw not just an outsider, but a person of remarkable strength, patience, and cleverness. The young men who had planned the prank eventually approached her family, offering apologies that were sincere but tinged with embarrassment. They had learned their lesson in a way they could never forget. Respect, they realized, was earned, not assumed. And cleverness and courage were qualities that could not be measured by age, gender, or background. The Apache girl, true to her nature, accepted their apologies quietly, letting her calm demeanor communicate the forgiveness and understanding she felt. The sheriff also learned from the experience. He realized that his own trust in the judgment of others had not been enough, and that wisdom often lay in observing carefully, even when something seemed harmless. The incident reminded him that respect for all people, regardless of their differences, was a crucial part of maintaining peace and harmony in the town. As the weeks passed, the story became part of the town's history. People told it to visitors and new residents, sharing the tale of the brave Apache girl who had escaped from the sheriff's cell and demonstrated the power of patience, intelligence, and courage. It became more than just a story of a prank. It became a lesson about humility, respect, and the importance of understanding and valuing the strengths of others. Even those who had initially laughed at the idea of trapping her began to change their attitudes. They approached her with respect, acknowledging her intelligence and bravery. The town slowly learned that underestimating someone could lead to embarrassment, and that courage and cleverness were qualities that deserved admiration. For the Apache girl, life returned to normal, but with a quiet sense of pride. She had faced a challenge without fear, used her intelligence to overcome obstacles, and remained true to her nature. The prank had failed, but in its failure, it had strengthened her reputation and reminded everyone in the town that courage and patience often speak louder than words. The memory of that night lingered for years. The townspeople never forgot the lesson of humility, and the young men who had tried to play the prank carried the experience with them, always remembering the cleverness and bravery of the Apache girl. Her quiet strength became a symbol, a reminder that actions, courage, and intelligence are far more powerful than jokes or assumptions. And so, what began as a mischievous prank transformed into a story of respect and admiration. The Apache girl had shown that true strength lies not in force or loudness, but in patience, clever thinking, and the calm assurance that comes from knowing oneself. The town had learned a valuable lesson, one that would shape its people for generations. And the Apache girl had quietly secured her place in its history. Not through words or boasting, but through her actions and her courage. The days following the Apache girl's clever escape were filled with quiet reflection and slow change in the small town. Life returned to its usual rhythm. The wooden streets buzzed with merchants opening their shops. Children ran after each other laughing, and the soft clatter of hooves and carts marked the passage of time. Yet beneath this calm, a subtle shift had taken place. The people of the town, who once laughed at the idea of the daring girl roaming near their homes, now regarded her with a mixture of respect, caution, and admiration. The young men who had hatched the prank continued their daily routines, but their behavior had changed. Gone was the easy confidence and careless laughter that had defined them. In its place was humility and a sense of reflection. They moved more quietly, their heads often bowed in thought, remembering the night when their joke had completely failed. They had expected to control or surprise her, but instead, they had been outwitted by patience, cleverness, and courage. It was a lesson they could never forget. Some of the townspeople still whispered about the event, retelling the story of how the girl had vanished from the cell without a trace. They spoke with awe about her intelligence, her calm demeanor, and her ability to think clearly under pressure. Even the sheriff, who had initially agreed to the prank reluctantly, now spoke of her with respect when he told the story. He emphasized the importance of humility, caution, and understanding, reminding everyone that people are far more capable than appearances might suggest. The Apache girl herself returned to her usual life on the outskirts of town, near her family's land. She moved with the same quiet confidence as before. Yet now she carried a sense of satisfaction that came from overcoming a challenge in a clever and thoughtful way. She had not sought revenge, nor had she wished to humiliate those who had underestimated her. Her victory was in her calm intelligence, in her ability to outthink a situation, and in the quiet knowledge that she had proven herself without raising her voice or showing anger. Her family noticed the difference in her demeanor, though not her outward actions. She seemed even more composed, more observant, and more confident in her abilities. Her parents and elders recognized her courage and cleverness and spoke to her with pride. They did not need to hear every detail of her experience in the cell. They could sense her strength, and that was enough. Her actions had silently communicated everything that needed to be known. Over time, the townspeople began to interact with her differently. Where there had once been teasing, doubt, or even mild annoyance, there was now respect and consideration. Children watched her with admiration, learning lessons of courage and clever thinking without needing to be taught directly. Adults approached her more cautiously, mindful of her intelligence and her ability to handle herself in difficult situations. Her quiet presence became a reminder that respect is earned through action, and that patience and cleverness can overcome even the most careless assumptions. The young men who had once been her pranksters eventually approached her family to apologize. They spoke sincerely, though some still carried embarrassment for having been outwitted so completely. They expressed regret for their thoughtless actions and promised to treat her and her family with greater respect in the future. Her family accepted the apologies, understanding that the young men had learned an important lesson. The Apache girl herself offered a quiet acknowledgement, a calm smile, showing that she held no ill will. Her forgiveness was not loud or dramatic, but it was genuine, reinforcing the lesson of patience, strength, and dignity. As the weeks passed, the story of her escape grew in the telling. It was shared in the saloons, in homes, and among travelers who passed through the town. Each retelling emphasized her intelligence, her bravery, and her calmness under pressure. People spoke of her ability to remain patient and think clearly, even in a situation designed to embarrass or trap her. The story became a symbol in the town, teaching lessons of respect, humility, and cleverness to anyone who heard it. Even years later, the tale of the Apache girl's escape remained part of the town's memory. Children grew up hearing it, learning from her example that strength is not always loud or aggressive, but often quiet, intelligent, and patient. The young men who had once played the prank carried the lesson with them for life, remembering how their carelessness had been met with such cleverness and composure. The sheriff, too, often shared the story, reminding others that understanding and respecting the abilities of everyone, regardless of age or background, was essential. Through all of this, the Apache girl continued her life quietly and steadily. She helped her family, moved freely through the lands she loved, and carried herself with dignity. She did not seek fame, nor did she demand recognition. Her strength lay in her actions, in the way she handled challenges, and in the calm intelligence she applied to every situation. Her escape from the cell had not only secured her freedom but had also secured the respect and admiration of everyone around her. The town itself began to change, slowly and subtly. People became more careful in their judgments, more thoughtful in their actions, and more respectful in their interactions. They realized that assumptions based on appearances, age, or background could lead to embarrassment or even failure. The story of the Apache girl became a quiet guide, shaping their attitudes and teaching them to value patience, intelligence, and courage in all people. The young men, in particular, learned a lasting lesson. They became more mindful of their actions and words, aware that cleverness and courage could come from unexpected places. They shared the story with their own children, emphasizing the importance of respect, humility, and careful thought. What had begun as a prank had transformed into a powerful lesson that would ripple through generations. The Apache girl's influence, though quiet, extended far beyond the moment of her escape. She had demonstrated that strength is not only physical but also mental and emotional. She had shown that patience and observation could overcome obstacles that brute force or hasty action could not. And she had done so with dignity, without malice, and without seeking to harm those who had underestimated her. Her actions spoke louder than words, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed or heard of her cleverness. Even as time passed and the town grew, the story remained. It was told and retold, each retelling reinforcing the lessons she had silently taught. Newcomers to the town were quickly informed of the tale, learning that the Apache girl was not just another resident, but a figure of intelligence, courage, and quiet strength. The legend of her escape became a reminder that patience, careful thought, and dignity are qualities that should never be underestimated. The Apache girl, for her part, continued her life without fanfare. She did not boast of her cleverness, nor did she seek to punish those who had tried to trick her. She moved with quiet confidence, knowing her own abilities and trusting in her own intelligence. Her family, the land, and her community remained her focus, and she carried herself with the same calm dignity that had allowed her to outwit the town's pranksters in the first place. In the end, the prank that had been meant to amuse turned into a story of respect, humility, and intelligence. The young men learned that thoughtless actions could have unexpected results, The townspeople learned to value patience and cleverness, and the Apache girl quietly cemented her place as a figure of courage and intelligence. The story became more than just an event. It became a symbol of what can be achieved through calm thinking, careful planning, and respect for oneself and others. And so, the Apache girl lived on in the town's memory. Not as a girl who had been tricked, but as someone who had turned a challenge into a triumph. Her quiet strength and cleverness became an example for all, showing that true courage is not always loud, that intelligence and patience can overcome even the most unexpected obstacles, and that respect is earned through actions, not assumed through appearances. In time, everyone who heard the story remembered the lesson. Never underestimate someone, for their strength, courage, and cleverness may be far greater than it appears. And the Apache girl, with her quiet dignity, had proven this in a way that would be remembered for generations.